Do you want a king of tone without the 2-year waitlist or the hefty price tag? Watch me turn this Fuzz pedal kit into a legendary pedal right now. Hello people, Joe from Hello Sailor Effects here. Welcome to today's video. In today's video, I'm going to take you through a step-by-step guide of how I change a Fuzz pedal kit into the legendary king of tone. I'm going to use all the knowledge that I've gained over 15 years building pedals at sea whilst in the Royal Navy. If you're like me and you've been gassing after a KOT but can't afford the price tag and are far too impatient to wait, I'm going to show you how to build one using the Fuzz kit but also using the original Japanese diodes. Stick around to the end and you'll get to hear this killer pedal in action. Cheers! This is everything you get with the kit. I have went ahead and painted the enclosure. Although it come drilled, which is nice because it's drilled to the same specs as the original KOT, I had to put some Hello Sailor Effects sort of style on it. And I went with Kawasaki green based, so it's Kawasaki green on the outside and then Volt green in the centre, with my own artwork and styling and branding. I'm sure Fuzzdog won't mind me putting my branding on this because I am essentially making it. Now the only differences are I'm changing out the white PTFE washers on our 3-pole double throw switches for these, some copper ones. They're small enough so then the LED will fit in place next to it, and I really don't like the plastic washers, I just don't. Also, just to add to the fun, although Fuzzdog do supply diodes, I've got 2 sets of diodes here which are the original Panasonic diodes. I believe they're Panasonic. Anyway, the original diodes that Analog Man uses in his King of Tones. I've got sets of them, or set for obviously each side of the pedal. So I'm going to upgrade it, if you like, to try and get it as close to the original King of Tone as possible. Now, I don't have a King of Tone to test. I haven't got £600 to buy one second hand, and the waiting list is so long that my 5-year-old will probably be in university before I receive it, which is fantastic for Analog Man. Such an inspiration. However, I haven't got that much time to wait, and I haven't got the money to buy a second hand one, so time to build one today. This is why I always advise Fuzzdog as a beginner starter kit for anyone who's just starting out to build pedals. Look at this. The build documentation is just absolutely massive. Now, I'm not going to go through the build documentation today. I'm just going to build the pedal. However, it does highlight something because I'm in work today, as ever. I'm duty when I'm doing these videos, so I'm 2 birds with 1 stone. But I've also, because I'm duty, I'm not home in my workshop. Now, I haven't brought my fluke, my tester, so I can't tell which resistor is which. I don't actually know the colour codes. I mean, who knows all of that? Probably old school engineers, but not me. So, Fuzzdog's kit comes with a downloadable document that gives you everything that you need to know. And look at this detailed photograph. So I'll be able to look at this photograph here and match the colours up, and hopefully my pedal will work. Because I don't know what value resistors these all are. I'm just going to copy this, paint by numbers. To that end, I do always advise when you're starting a PCB build, not really my forte to be honest, but when you're starting a PCB build, I like to start off with our resistors first, then any sort of connectors like the IC sockets and stuff like that, and then capacitors, and then transistors last. I do it in that order because the resistors are low profile, so when you're putting a resistor in, it doesn't take up much space. You're not likely to knock it and such, and they're not very susceptible to heat damage. Not really. You'd have to put some heat in them for them to damage. Then your IC sockets, again, not really susceptible to damage, don't take up much space. Capacitors, now they do take up a little bit more space. They stick higher off the board. They can be cumbersome and get in the way, which is why I leave them all the way almost till last. And then I do transistors last because they are susceptible to heat. So that means that you're not reheating them when you add another components. It's just as simple as that. So now I'm going to start the tedious task of matching these resistors to my lovely photograph. Apologies for interrupting this legendary effects pedal build with a small request. Could you please press share below and then copy the link? You don't have to share it. That will send a message to Instagram to let them know that you're getting value from my videos. And that will make Instagram share my videos with more people and in turn help my channel grow. Thank you. I managed to get a couple of the 1 meg resistors on the board. However, I've run into a slight problem. Age, would you believe? I can't actually see what colours match up to what colours correctly. Not 100% confident, and what I don't want to do is solder a load of resistors to the board and then have to remove them at a later date. So now I'm going to rely on technology. Look at this, fantastic. A quick search on the App Store for Android and I found a resistor colour code calculator. So what we're going to do now is we're going to plug in the values, and I'm just going to lie all the resistors on top of my list, and then I'll just populate the board from there. So this resistor here is a red, black, orange, brown. Red, black, orange, brown gives us 220k at 1%. The 1% is the allowed discrepancy from the stated value. So if we have a 100k resistor and it's a 1% tolerance, that means it can be either 99k or 101k before it's out of tolerance. Simple as that. So I'm going to crack on with this tedious task of going through every single one of these. But this does show you that you don't need any equipment to do this kit. You can do it with just your phone and buying the kit. You don't need to buy things like a multimeter or anything like that. Although it really does help, and I really wish I remembered mine. There's that tedious job done of putting all of our resistors on top of our list. I'm glad that's over with. I've been left with these two 2.2k resistors. Now, without reading the documents, which I highly advise that you do read the documents, I'm going to go ahead and guess that they're for our LEDs, current limiting resistors for our LEDs, but I'll put them to one side and we shall come back to them. Next step is going to be to populate the board with all of these resistors. There we have all of our resistors now in place on the board. I'm going to move on to the capacitors. Actually, no, I'm not. That's a lie. I'm going to move on to the sockets and the dip switch. Right, so I'm going to get these in place. IC sockets are going to go in place here, and the dip switch is going to go in the center somewhere. I did see. Yeah, right there. With your IC sockets, I don't know if you can see here, there's a tiny little nick out of one end. That usually denotes the top, and it's also the IC itself, which is on the bottom here, has a little dot. Now the dot lines up with the nick. So if the nick's at the top, the dot's at the top. If you mess that up, you'll have the wrong pin out and your IC will not work. Actually, I've just called that an IC all the way through before people tell me off of that. This is, of course, an Opamp. Operational amplifier, which is basically a couple of transistors together. That's going to go down terribly on the internet. Fantastic. Well done, Joe. There we have our two Opamp sockets and our dip switch attached to the board. Next, I'm going to go ahead and lay out all of my capacitors on this list. Now, to read the value of our capacitors, there's a couple of different types. This type here, this box capacitor, this says 10NK100. Right, the first value there, 10, is the value of the capacitor. So that's a 10NF, and it's going to go right next to C1 there. That is a 10. Perfect. Next type of capacitor you've got are these red box capacitors. Now, these are 1UK63. That's a 1UF capacitor rated to 63 volts. So we put them next to the 1U. Now we've also got electrolytic capacitors that are 1UF. And they are labelled up straight as 1UF 50 volts. Now it confused me at first because there's four 1UF capacitors and two different types. Now it did confuse me at first until I looked at the list, and it actually tells you below my list, until I looked at the board, and it actually shows you. Another thing worthy of note while we're here is that some of our capacitors and some of our diodes have a little asterisk next to it, and what that means is if you're not using a charge pump, you don't fit them. And I'm not using the charge pump. And it says it right here, only required if including the charge pump. I'm not using the charge pump. Here's all of our capacitors laid out on the board, and I have made a start and I've fitted the electrolytic caps. Now, one thing I will say is, usually I leave the electrolytic caps till last because they protrude out more than the rest of the caps. So it's easier to move around, maneuver on the board and stuff if you leave them till last. However, I've fitted them first today just because the three at the bottom here on the piece of paper kept rolling around and it was annoying me, so I fitted them to the board. And now I'm going to struggle with them in a way for the rest of the build. Fantastic. There's all of our caps now fitted to the board. Next, I'm going to move on to the presence control, which is a little trim pot here. Now, when you buy this kit, you can choose whether you have the presence control on outside of the enclosure or not. But for me, and I know it's a pain to have one of the controls on the inside, but for me, the original KOT had it that way, so I wanted it that way. So the presence control that is delivered with the kit is a 50k trim pot, or two 50k trim pots, I should say. Now, they just slot in to this position here. Now on to everyone's favourite part of a pedal build is the diodes, and they are pretty important in the King of Tone. The reason why the originals are so expensive is the components used, and the main component is the diodes. Now, this first diode, D13, is just a polarity protection in case someone plugs the wrong polarity into the pedal. It will just cut the power out so it doesn't damage anything, and that is a 1N4001 power diode. Right, next, I love the way they do this, by the way. Fuzzdog, well done for this. They label it up MA856 and 1S1588 for the diodes. Now, they're the original ones used by King of Tone, in the King of Tone by Analog Man. So if you're building this Emperor pedal, you'll get to be able to know what, great England there. You'll be able to know which diodes go there. However, these are the ones that are supplied with the kit. Don't really know what ones they are. The label on them's quite small. I think the 4148 label on them's too small for me to read. Anyway, I'll use them probably in another pedal. But I have got MA856 diodes. So 4 D1 to 4 and then 4 D7 to 10. Then I've also got some 1S1588 diodes, another Rock and Horse Doo-Doo diode. Now the MA ones, I'm pretty sure they're Panasonic, because the MA 150s that were used in the original TS808 are Panasonic and really hard to get hold of. They sound terrible in every other circuit, by the way, apart from a Tube Screamer, funnily enough. So there's our magic diodes. This is the bit that makes my King of Tone build different from the Fuzzdog build. Just makes it, in my mind, a bit special. And he actually puts in, or they, I don't know if it's a he or a she, they put in their build the magic ingredients of the diodes, and I actually encourage you to source out your own diodes and try out some other stuff. Another thing to think about when you're wiring in your diodes, the line at the end of the diode. So in this one it's like a grey line, but on these diodes, for example, it's a black line. This line goes into the square pad. So D13 is our power diode. The negative goes into the round. Sorry, the positive anode goes into the round, and the negative anode, which has the line on it, goes into the square. There we have all of our diodes, magic and otherwise, fitted to the board. The next bit for this board is here. It says if you aren't adding the charge pump, leave out C19 to 21, D14 and 15 and IC1, which I have left out. It says place jumpers, but in the parts shown below. So this is this part of the board here. Here's our IC, and we have these little supply A and supply B sections. Now it's telling me to jumper these first two pads together. Now I always save the legs off my components, and they are perfect for this sort of thing. And all I do is I just bend them over like so, and then this bent piece of metal just slots straight into there, and that makes a nice little jumper, and I'll do that on both sides and solder it in. I've opted for the regular 3-pole double throw switches rather than the optical switches, so we're using this half of this page. And of course our 2.2k resistors from before are going to fit in the R1 and R2 positions. And also, when it comes to Stomp switches, I have a real hatred for the cheap ones that are loud. Now, don't know how well that'll translate, but these are super soft touch and really high quality switches. So that's awesome from Fuzzdog, because you see a lot of times they come with real rubbishy cheap ones. Now, this board, it says to have our switches orientated that way, so then the lugs are pointing like this in accordance with that red line there. Another thing I like or dislike about some pedals is this little line on the thread of the foot switch. I prefer that to be pointing to the top of the pedal. Now, it means nothing, but to me, I really need that. I don't know why, it's just the way that my brain's wired up. So if we take our enclosure, I like that cutout to be pointing to the top of the pedal, so I like it to go in that way. Now, the way that this is orientated, this part here will be pointing to the top of the pedal, so when I solder these in, I'm going to flip them over and make sure that that's pointing that way. No other reason than that's the way I like to have it. And now when I solder them in, it should be the way that I want it to be. Next, I'm going to attach this little connector. I mean, you could run wires if you want. That's how I would do it if I was building a regular pedal. So, but for this, I'm going to use this little connector, and it just slots in into all of these holes here. I'm going to solder that in place, and then our Stomp switch will be soldered on top of that afterwards, but I'll do that when it's all aligned up on the enclosure. Random tip for you: when you're soldering this, the temptation is to have the circuit board facing you like it would fit in a pedal, because, well, that's obvious. However, if you turn it on its side, you can get in better with your soldering iron. So if you're soldering this way, when you get into the middle, you've got a solder pad either side of your iron, and the likelihood of you soldering two pads together is pretty high. But if you turn it on its side that way round and go from top to bottom, wet your tip, hey, and then just solder from the side, you'll be able to solder each pin in turn without soldering them together. I guarantee that first couple of times you do this, or without watching this video, you'll have done it that way round and definitely soldered some pins together. I know I did. Now we're going to take a look at our pots, and as ever they come with these little locating lugs, which we're not going to use, so I'm just going to take away all of them before we move on to the next bit. Now we're on to the fun bit, orientating our pots. So this circuit board, when it's inside, will be sitting this way round, and our pots will be situated something like that. So this is a 100k audio pot, which, as we can see from our list here, 100k audio is our volume pot. On our PCB, we see that our volume pot is here. Volume pot A and 100k audio. Bearing in mind there's two different types of 100k here. So there's 100k A, which is audio, arithmetic, only log in front of a riff. There you go, there's my dyslexia kicking in. So it's
5 hours later.
It's a log anyway, a 100k log, which is audio taper. So our volume pot for this side will be here. Volume pot, and now A. Now the gain pots are 100k B, which is linear. That means that they move exactly as you think they would. It's a straight curve. So the carbon track on these is the same thickness all the way round, whereas on the audio taper it'll be thicker one end than the other end, so then you get a curve, if you like, instead of a straight line if you draw it out on a graph. So our gain pots are going to go in here, like so. It would have been much easier for me to put them in the enclosure first and then place the circuit on top, but I never do things the easy way, ever. So there we have our pot situated there. It's going to be nice and easy for me to just solder them in place now. That was almost another epic mistake. I did actually solder in one lug of each pot, but I had it upside down because I'm looking at it upside down. As you can see here, the pots are clearly on the opposite side to the components, so I would have had it the wrong way around. What I'm going to do is, with these 4 pots, I'm going to attach them into the enclosure, and then I'm going to solder straight on. I'll put the PCB in, I'll solder it in that way, otherwise my brain just can't figure it out. There we have our 4 back pots wired in, and as you can see, they're like stand-off pots, so they'll hold the circuit in place. These pots, the 25k tone pots, are not that way. As you can see, they are just straight lugs like what I would normally use. So I'm going to fit them in here, and I'm going to run wires to the positions on the board. Actually, I'll solder the wire in on the board, and then I'll fit them in here and we'll join them together in a second. While I'm also doing that, I'm going to go ahead and fit the ground and the supply, the ground and the signal wire for the input and outputs. I'm going to just attach a length of wire to each of these, so then we can attach them to our jacks as we go. And likewise with our power connection here, I'm going to do the same. That's our pots for tone now fitted. Tone pots now fitted into the enclosure as such, and tightened up with my Peppers pots little handy pedal spanner things. I've wired in the input and output jacks. We've got our silicon wire. Now, Fuzzdog do provide you with wire, which is fantastic. There's more than enough to complete the task, but I really like pink wire inside, just like military equipment, so I'm going to keep doing that. And there's our power jack, and then I've attached 3 wires for each of the tone pots. Now, personally, I would have preferred to have the right angle jacks, so I could have just fitted them in. But the problem being is, with me opting for the normal drill layout, the board doesn't accommodate for this, so you have to run wires. Fine. Before I wire this in, I'm going to go ahead and fit the power jack, not that way around, the power jack, and my 2 DC jacks can be fitted last, but the power jack, just because it takes a large spanner and it's real pain in the backside to get in there. So I'm going to fit that before I start fitting the board. And also, before I move on to all of that, and before I forget, because I do always forget this genuinely, I'm going to fit the op-amps into the circuit. Now, as I was saying before, if I rest this on here, it should be able to see it. There's a little cutout at the top of each of our sockets, and that end is where the dot goes towards. Now, when you take these op-amps out of the packaging, you need to just give them a little tiny squeeze to make them fit inside the socket. If you try and fit them in without doing a squeeze, it kind of doesn't work. I advise to put one side in, make sure it lines up, and then manipulate the other side so then they are sort of lining up, and then give it a squeeze and squeeze it in, and there we go, it's fitted. If you try and just push it straight in, what you'll end up doing is bending one of the legs or pushing the legs out. I was thinking it's a pain to try and straighten it up again and get it back in, and they're never as strong once you've bent them. So take it out, make sure it's orientated the correct way. All I do is just give all 8 legs a pinch together, make sure they're pointing not straight down but more straight. Tell you what, my England's terrible today. Just make sure they're a bit more at a right angle. Get one side in, and then just keep an eye on the other side and make sure it's lined up and give it a squeeze. That one's not quite there. And then that should be us. I mean, I've soldered that in one key, haven't I? Brilliant. But yeah, that should be us ready to go. Next, I'm going to solder the ends of these to our pot. Now, I'm assuming, this is a massive assumption, I could probably read this paperwork and save myself lots of work, but it's me, so I'm not going to. That when I turn this that way over, I can just solder them straight in, just like as if I was slotting the pots in that way round. There's going to be no twisting involved. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rest that there like, let's get all the wires out. I'm going to rest that there like so, and I'm just going to solder these connections on. And this wire is flexible enough that it'll just slide underneath the board without impeding anything, he says. Another thing which you may need or may not need in your toolbox of tricks is once you've tinned the end of your wire and made a hook with it, I've shown this before, I like to make a hook with it to attach it to the pot. If you go for this layout, it's definitely more difficult than just getting the presence controls on the outside and you'll get the correct pots, that it all just slots together. But if you're like me and you want it to be less functional and more accurate to the original, then here we go. So I like to make a hook with it once I've tinned it, and I bend the end of the pot connections back. That way I can make a solid mechanical connection by putting my hook through it and then just bending the pot down so it's flat. And there we have a solid mechanical connection. So when I now wet the tip and solder it in, it's not just solder holding it in place, there's a good solid mechanical connection too. Not that you particularly need it in this, but why not do it properly? There we have it, finally fitted. Get in. Now, next is going to be fitting this, our Stomp switch board. The LEDs aren't fitted yet because I don't know how deep I'm going to have to go with the LEDs. So I know that the long leg has to go into the round pin. So if we fit them like this, and then pull them right through for now. Once I've fitted these Stomp switches in and got a nut on them, I'll be able to push the LED down and fit it into its hole. And then once that's all in place, I'll solder them in last. And hopefully that should be it. There we have our board fitted. Our LEDs still aren't soldered in, and neither is the large selection of, I don't know, what would you call it, strips? I don't know. The two boards aren't soldered together basically. Now if I hold the LEDs in place and flip it over, I have of course gone for the copper washers that I shown earlier on, because I don't like the white washers that come with it. The PTFE washers just don't look that good, and the large metal ones I usually use would be too big. They would foul where the LEDs come through. Next I'm going to solder in the LEDs and that strip before moving on to the power jack and the in-out jacks. Our circuit fully wired up. All of the LEDs are wired up, and the input output jacks, power jack, all wired up using pink wire as I love it. Now on to the last final bit of aesthetics. Come on, more Great England here for me today. The last bit of aesthetics is of course the knobs, and I've gone with these smaller style. I'm saying that, I don't even know if they're going to fit now, because these larger pots are, there you go, smaller style pots, smaller style knobs. I really like these, and mainly because Simon Jarrett of Kingsley Amplifiers uses the cream version on the Maiden, and I've got the Maiden D. I absolutely love that amplifier, preamplifier. I need to do a video on it soon, but these are the ones I'm going to go with. I mean, let's face it, this is analog man circuit. I know that Fuzzdog have made it the Emperor, which, you know, a nod to the King of Tone. It's analog man circuit. I'm never going to outsound analog man on his own circuit, but come on, I can catch up to him with looks. The King of Tone clone, fully wired up. I'd love to know what you think of my process of building this kit, and if anyone else has built any Fuzzdog kits and has any recommendations for future videos, please let me know. Now the last thing to do is of course to sign the bottom. Now those of you who followed me for some time will know that I like to call my KOT clones Kilo Oscar Tangos, because of course I can't copy Analog Man, that would be completely wrong, and I also don't want to copy Fuzzdog and have Emperor as the kit, but I do want to put Fuzzdog somewhere on here, so I'm going to go ahead and write Kilo Oscar Tango Fuzzdog, and then, you know, sign it in some other ways using my classic silver pen that I always use. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and sign this, and then you guys can get ready for the sound sample. Now that this legendary pedal is built, it's time to get onto the sound sample. But before we get to the sound sample, I would love to know if any of you plan on building one of these after this video. Please let me know in the comments. And now on with the tones.